Hey guys, tonight we roll quietly up a gravel path and pause before an enormous Victorian estate that seems just slightly too stern. Picture the crunch of those wheels, the gentle huff of horses, and that small anxious flutter in your chest whispering you might not make it out of this place alive. High windows shimmer, ornate stonework stretches skyward, and every shadow appears to have formed its own judgment about you. Inside, people will eat, sleep, quarrel, charm each other, grow restless, and consume far too much tea while acting like everything is completely fine. So before you settle in, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly appreciate what I create here. Drop a comment telling me where you are tuning in from and what hour it is right now, because I genuinely love picturing this drowsy little audience scattered around the globe. Now lower the lights, maybe switch on a fan for that gentle background drone, and let us slide into tonight's story together. You climb down from the carriage, shoes grinding on the tiny pebbles, breath forming pale clouds in the crisp evening cold. The estate looms before you, large enough that you sense it could actually devour you if it worked up an appetite. Stone stairs climb toward a substantial front entrance framed by pillars and metalwork that tries desperately to announce that people here possess wealth. Please feel duly amazed. Somewhere within, a clock strikes slow and resonant, as if the building itself is monitoring its own heartbeat. The year rests somewhere during Queen Victoria's extended rule, an era when Britain commands a vast empire and wealthy families construct homes like this to demonstrate they deserve a spot near the summit of the social ladder. Between 1837 and 1901, while Victoria occupies the throne, hundreds of country estates and urban mansions such as this appear throughout Britain, each one a massive stone declaration of prosperity. You sense the attention of the structure on you immediately, from the rows of shadowy windows to the considerably smaller eyes of the figure waiting by the entrance. The butler stands there rigid in a dark jacket that likely contains more discipline than your whole daily schedule. He does not grin, because grinning at arrivals near the front door would come far too close to enjoying oneself on duty. You surrender your cloak or overcoat, fingertips slightly numb from the chill, and you sense the first principle wrap around you. Someone else will now manage nearly everything you handle. It sounds indulgent until you grasp that this also means people will discreetly assess the manner you removed that coat for the remainder of the night. Before you even step over the doorway, your gaze drifts upward over a forest of chimneys, each suggesting a hearth inside, because central heating remains a pipe dream in most of these estates. The roofline bristles with decorative masonry and small peaks, so even the silhouette feels fussy and overdone, as though the structure spent excessive time preparing. Gothic arches, coloured glass, perhaps a carved stone creature or two lurking along a railing. Everything surrounding you quietly declares that refinement here demands constant attention. You catch the scent of coal smoke from the chimneys and moist soil from the gardens, trimmed into precise patterns that likely impress visitors who genuinely appreciate gardens. Gas lanterns glow beside the entrance, their yellowish glow wavering in a manner that makes every shadow shift like a drape, even when nobody is near it. Many large homes such as this start converting from candles to gas during the mid-19th century, transforming evenings into a softer, illuminated version of daytime, but also filling spaces with fumes and a persistent anxiety about leaks. Some proprietors even demand keeping certain lamps somewhat dim, persuaded that stronger gaslight will cause the rich hues of their wallpaper to fade quicker and destroy their meticulously arranged atmosphere. You could find that amusing, but then you recall how irritated you become when your phone screen shows fingerprints, so perhaps you relate to them slightly. At the very peak of the stairs, the front entrance waits, tall and substantial, with a gleaming brass knocker fashioned like a lion that obviously never misses gym sessions. Your palm touches the cool metal, and in that brief hesitation before it drops, you sense the significance of everything that waits on the opposite side: regulations, assumptions, and considerable amounts of heavily patterned carpet. When the butler eventually pulls the door inward, a rush of warmer air escapes, bearing coal heat, beeswax, furniture polish, and a subtle hint of some strong floral fragrance that somebody likely applied far too liberally earlier. Your initial genuine step across the threshold seems like a minor performance because someone watches from the staircase top. Someone watches from the side, and the butler absolutely notices if you stumble. Even your overcoat leads a social existence now. Hand it to a housemaid who will recall if it bears mud along the bottom or if you abandoned a glove in the pocket. Victorian households such as this operate on invisible records, minor observations passed from servant to servant, so the people who control the house can act as if everything simply occurs through enchantment. Historians continue debating whether most of these rigid conventions genuinely influence daily conduct, or whether later accounts exaggerate the pressure. But right now, you absolutely sense that every action carries weight. The entrance chamber extends around you, covered with black and white tiles that make your vision waver slightly, as though the house wishes to emphasize that straight lines are deceptive. Portraits hang along the walls, grave faces of predecessors who appear to have remained at the identical gathering for 2 centuries, and none of them seem pleased about it. Somewhere beside the staircase, a tall holder contains umbrellas and walking canes, and positioned nearby you notice a peculiar little shoe brush employed to clean footwear so that exterior grime never presumes to venture farther inside. Some households actually maintain a pet hedgehog in the scullery to consume any wandering insects. A small, prickly worker on the unofficial staff roster, though you will not encounter that from this refined doorway. You remain quite motionless for a beat, allowing the combination of warmth, ceremony, and subtle absurdity to settle over you like unfamiliar weather. You pause there just long enough to understand that this house does not perceive a person entering. It perceives a classification arriving. Visitor, proprietor, servant in formal attire, impoverished relations overstaying their welcome. Every individual represents a shifting puzzle component that must fit somewhere on an unseen diagram. In Victorian Britain, the entire social realm functions this way, arranged tidily from aristocracy at the peak to workers at the base, and a large house such as this essentially becomes that arrangement transformed into stone and decoration. You surrender your hat and gloves, and the butler's deliberate nod silently files you into the appropriate category in his thoughts. Are you significant enough for direct engagement from the family, or are you about to transform into background decoration beside a decorative plant? The butler himself represents more than an elegant doorkeeper. He oversees the wine storage, the silverware, and considerable portions of the household's ceremonial rhythm. If something valuable disappears, his position faces risk. His shirt front displays starch reaching an almost militarized degree of rigidity. His facial hair is groomed to precision, and his demeanor communicates, "I have encountered individuals like you previously, and I remain unimpressed." A capable butler can remain in a position for generations and possesses more confidential knowledge than the family chaplain. Historians continue disputing whether servants at this rank predominantly experience devoted fondness or predominantly suppressed bitterness. But everyone acknowledges that without them, the elaborate social spectacle collapses immediately. For entertainment, some butlers establish minor private arrangements, a specific method to position decanters or arrange napkins, small invisible marks that quietly assert, "I govern this establishment more than anyone suspects." Not far behind him stands the housekeeper, typically addressed as Mrs. regardless of whether she has married. She supervises the female staff, the linens, and a frightening quantity of keys. The keys jingle softly at her waist when she moves, and you cannot avoid thinking she sounds like a compact, highly organized prison. If you glimpsed inside her secured cabinets, you could discover stacks of meticulously repaired sheets, extra candles, soap, and an alarming quantity of tablecloths. An estate of this scale can possess separate cloths for breakfast, tea, dinner, and extremely formal dinner, because evidently the meal represents only part of what transforms with the hour. You capture a moment when the butler and housekeeper share a glance, a brief flash of reciprocal assessment. They represent the dual supports of structure here, each commanding their own domain, and collectively they guarantee the proprietors can move smoothly, pretending everything naturally remains pristine. Beyond them, footmen in coordinating uniforms shift quietly, nearly theatrical in their costumes. Their stature, vocal quality, and even appearance can influence their hiring, because their responsibility involves partly transporting dishes and partly adorning the dining space. If you sense like a decoration in someone else's social production, recall that at least you are not literally being selected to complement the furnishings. Lower in status, housemaids disappear into doorways carrying brooms and coal containers, backs already curved from the morning's labour. They scrub grates, dust infinite trinkets, and eliminate chamber pots before anyone respectable must acknowledge them. Somewhere beyond view, kitchen maids peel enormous quantities of potatoes and perpetually wash dishes that you will only observe when they appear flawlessly clean. The structure of the house itself inscribes this ranking. The main staircase before you rises in an elegant arc, decorated with portraits and bordered by carved railings. This belongs to the family and their visitors, and every step on it deserves observation. Behind shut doors, thinner and steeper staircases wind their path through the house, the renowned back stairs designated for those who perform the labour. Servants typically face prohibition from using the primary staircase except for particular duties, and even then they frequently maintain lowered gazes, as though eye contact could damage the finish. It resembles inhabiting a structure with distinct layers of existence, and you have only just entered the polished one. On one wall of the chamber or in an adjacent hallway hangs one of the most crucial innovations in this social apparatus, the bell panel. Small brass markers identify different spaces: dining space, library, morning chamber, master bedroom, and beneath each marker sits a small bell. Somewhere in the house, a button or cord gets pulled, and a bell chimes in this array, summoning a particular servant to a particular location. You observe the sequence of bells and grasp you are essentially viewing a 19th century notification system that you cannot silence. A perceptive servant can recognize which bell sounded through audio alone, like a tense, poorly compensated ensemble. In some houses, the bells connect to wires that physically wobble a small pendulum beneath each marker so you can identify which space is summoning even if the bell has ceased ringing. Someone clearly concluded that the one element the arrangement genuinely requires is additional moving components to clean. Nothing in this chamber exists accidentally. Substantial curtains beside the entrance block the frigid air, and dense carpet softens footfalls so that significant people need not hear the perpetual movement of servants. Hat holders and glove surfaces ensure outdoor grime does not progress far. Dividers and vegetation interrupt the visual path, so you cannot readily observe the messier realities beyond the refined area. There could even exist a designated chair for the household head near the fire, a subtle throne where he can examine the newspaper and act oblivious that every servant maintains one eye on him for instructions. If he folds the paper in a particular manner, that could indicate visitors are anticipated. If he places it down on the surface, it could mean he requires correspondence. Children enter this ranking with their own distinct regulations. The nursery attendant transports the younger ones past you, eyes firmly on her route, providing only the smallest of acknowledgements. A governess, neither entirely servant nor entirely family, follows behind with a book in hand and an expression that communicates she has reviewed the identical Latin assignment 4 occasions. She typically dines separately from the servants, yet not alongside the family for ceremonial meals, trapped in a social void that can prove extremely isolating. In many houses, she faces expectations to demonstrate flawless morality constantly, which creates substantial pressure when you are simultaneously attempting to prevent small children from inserting marbles in their nostrils. Gender integrates into this framework as precisely as the staircase curves. Males of the family inhabit rooms connected with commerce, law, or governance, and their footsteps qualify as significant sounds. Females face expectations to glide, not stomp, and to concentrate on the household domain, even in an immense house where nearly all the genuine household labour gets performed by other individuals. Popular publications praise the concept of the perfect wife as an angel in the residence, a tender presence who directs without elevating her voice and maintains everything peaceful. Nobody prints verses about the exhausted kitchen maid who has remained awake since before sunrise, although realistically, she accomplishes more genuine directing and rescuing than anyone else. A visitor such as yourself discovers rapidly which portions of this stratified realm are accessible and which remain forbidden. The drawing space, dining area, potentially the library. These represent secure zones where you may appear and speak provided you respect the protocol. The rear passages, servants' chamber, and attic spaces remain entirely outside your domain. Even without anyone articulating a syllable, the arrangement instructs you where you fit. By the moment you roll your shoulders to release the tension from travel, the mansion has already positioned you into its silent little diagram, another component in the living arrangement of ranking and routine. You surface before you genuinely intend to, suspended between the burden of the blankets and the faint scraping of coal being moved somewhere close by. For an instant, you remain motionless. Simply experience how substantial the bed feels on top of you, as though someone accumulated winter itself into layers of wool and feathers and proclaimed it a sleeping surface. The bed frame towers around you carve timber rising into a canopy with dense curtains that block drafts but also prevent anything resembling clean air. The pillow carries the scent of fresh linen and a touch of lavender, the variety that penetrates fabric from pouches concealed in drawers. It remains dim, hushed, and moderately cold, the variety of cold that nips the end of your nose and reminds you that central heating does not exist here. This represents a proper Victorian sleeping chamber, which signifies the bed serves more than sleeping. It represents a declaration object, a four-poster or half canopy with turned columns and substantial hangings that demonstrated to visitors when they glanced in that the household possesses sufficient wealth to maintain furniture that weighs more than certain cottages. Many upper and middle-tier homes in the 19th century treasure these massive bedsteads, the feather sleeping surfaces, and the mountains of quilts because the winter frost can penetrate stone walls and linger for months. You sense the sleeping surface gently compress where your form rests, feather and horsehair shifting beneath the sheets like a nest rearranging itself around you. Rising seems less like awakening and more like fleeing. Beneath the bed or immediately beside it rests the object you act like you do not consider, the chamber vessel. It waits, extremely functional and extremely unglamorous because even magnificent houses typically do not supply complete bathrooms for every sleeping chamber. Indoor plumbing spreads in wealthier residences by the later Victorian period, but it remains inconsistent, and the notion of every space containing its own private flushing toilet stays remote. For now, the chamber vessel represents the midnight compromise between convenience and a frozen walk down a passage. You may grin to yourself and consider it as the original delay button. Employ it, shut the cover, act like it no longer exists, and allow servants to manage the indignity afterward. A gentle tap on the door interrupts the silence. Before you respond, you detect a key rotating and the soft rustle of skirts or the muted tread of boots. Privacy operates differently in a house such as this. The space may technically belong to you, but the house anticipates servants to enter and exit on schedule, to open curtains, to prepare fires, to deliver hot water. Your lady's attendant or valet arrives with rehearsed discretion, eyes appropriately lowered, carrying a pitcher of steaming water that releases mist into the chilly atmosphere. In a standard Victorian schedule, servants frequently rise around 5 or 6 in the morning to begin labour, so that individuals like you can wake to heated spaces and fresh water. You are only now emerging while someone else has already invested hours of effort, so your toes need not freeze the instant they contact the floor. The curtains surrounding the bed get pulled back partially, and pale light enters from tall windows. Glass sections reveal a faint strip of sky, and maybe a suggestion of garden or city avenue. But all of that seems remote because the space creates its own small universe. On a stand against the wall rest a porcelain bowl and pitcher, the traditional washing arrangement. Your attendant or valet transfers the hot water into the bowl, blending it with what remains in a smaller container so it reaches just warm enough not to make you gasp. This becomes your morning cleansing. Face, hands, potentially neck and chest. You employing a washcloth and soap that carries a faint scent of lemon or rose. Historians continue disputing whether most individuals in households such as this genuinely bathe regularly in complete tubs or depend mainly on these swift basin cleanings. But everyone acknowledges that a daily splash occurs more frequently than the common image of perpetually grimy Victorians. You lean toward the bowl, splash water on your drowsy face, and blink as droplets travel down your neck. On the walls, decorated paper ascends from floor to ceiling. If your host proves particularly stylish and somewhat reckless, that attractive green or blue could contain arsenic-based colorants, especially in vivid emerald tones. In particular lighting and with gas lamps burning extended into the evening, those colorants can emit small amounts of dangerous vapor. Stories exist of individuals who report headaches, nausea, or irritated skin and never blame their glamorous wallpaper. You glance at the nearest section and silently hope that your host favours safer shades, or at minimum that your visit proves brief enough to avoid becoming a mobile chemistry trial. Victorian preference does not consistently arrive with a caution notice, and perhaps it ought to. Your attendant or valet has arranged clothing on a chair, a tidy still life of undergarments. First long drawers or chemise, then stockings, then the more complex layers. If you wear a corset, this becomes where the genuine dedication starts. The garment encircles your torso like a flexible enclosure, fastened at the rear with whalebone or steel supports that reshape your figure matching the style of the decade. Tight fastening does occur, though not consistently as dramatically as illustrations imply. A sensible corset aids posture and distributes the burden of substantial skirts, but it still makes you extremely conscious of each breath. Fastening up transforms into a form of intimate collaboration, your attendant tightening and modifying while you grip the bedpost and attempt not to contemplate breakfast. If you occupy the more masculine portion of the wardrobe, the challenge simply transfers to rigid collars and layers of waistcoat and jacket that establish their own armour. Regardless, Victorian clothing converts your body into construction. On the dressing surface, combs and brushes rest prepared beside bottles of hair oil, cologne or fragrance. A standard routine could include 100 strokes of the brush at night to maintain hair lustrous, so this morning involves more about coaxing it into the correct formation. Pins gleam in a small container like miniature lances, and somewhere among them waits at least one that will pierce your scalp when you least anticipate it. You permit someone else to separate, twist, and secure your hair, a peculiarly calming process if you disregard the occasional sharp poke. In some fashionable households, individuals even maintain special hair containers, small vessels where brushed-out hair gets preserved to be reused in cushions that expand elaborate styles. It proves strangely efficient and extremely slightly disturbing, like your own shedding returning for an additional performance. On a small ledge beside the fireplace, a clock ticks with self-satisfied regularity. Time holds significance in this house, not merely in an approximate sense, but in a minute-by-minute agenda. Breakfast occurs at a designated hour. Correspondence arrives at a designated hour. Calls maintain proper intervals. The clock's surface observes you dress and wash, projecting its small critical gaze on any indication of delay. Somewhere beside the entrance, a bell cord hangs suspended, connected to that network of wires and bells that travels through the house. If you pull it, someone below will detect and react, but employing it casually faces discouragement. Each ring indicates labour for someone who already possesses an extended list of responsibilities competing for their attention. You pull on boots or shoes polished earlier, sense the rigidity of leather moulded to your feet, and stand for an instant, simply listening. The subtle clink of china from distant areas suggests breakfast being arranged. The soft thud of footsteps on a passage indicates other spaces entering their own schedules. This sleeping chamber functions as both shelter and platform. It shields you from the raw exterior air and the disorder of the kitchens, but it also readies you to step into a day governed by appearances. The blankets remain crumpled behind you, still substantial with warmth, silently inviting you to collapse back and pretend none of this framework exists. You decline, straighten your clothes, and move toward the entrance, already sensing the mansion's silent schedule extending toward you like a gloved hand. You slip through a side entrance that appears nearly insulted to receive contact, painted a boring green that fails to coordinate with the glamorous spaces nearby. The timber gets covered in baize, that dense soft material that dampens sound, so when it shuts behind you the noise seems absorbed. One instant you stand in a refined realm of carpets and portraits. The next, you occupy a thin passage that carries the scent of soap, starch and yesterday's broth. This represents the concealed backbone of the mansion, the servant portion, constructed so thousands of responsibilities can occur while the significant individuals pretend the labour performs itself. You sense the atmosphere cool moderately, the illumination turn harsher, and the courteous public facade of the house drop away. The passage measures just broad enough for two individuals to squeeze past each other if neither maintains strong convictions about personal boundaries. Whitewashed walls capture every mark, and the floorboards bear the subtle scars of countless boots. Here, the regulations transform. Voices prove quicker, more functional. Footsteps sound different, more rushed, less practiced. Victorian homes tend to expand this way, with a formal front section shown to guests and a maze of hallways stitched behind so staff can transport food, fuel and linens along paths that keep them invisible. This kind of design becomes more widespread in the 1800s as household employment transforms into a massive part of city and rural existence. You trace your fingertips along the surface, detecting tiny ridges where conduits and cables conceal the silent framework of the home tucked away from view. A narrow stairway rises before you, its steps thinner and more weathered than the impressive stairs near the entrance. The railing is plainer, smoothed by the grasp of countless palms that haven't always had opportunity to be careful. You ascend, frame leaning forward, and grasp why. Individuals who navigate these stairs regularly tend to build powerful calves and very little tolerance for pointless trips. Staff can sprint up and down these flights scores of times each day, hauling platters, coal buckets, fabrics, and occasionally rumours that spread quicker than any note carried on parchment. Scholars still debate whether most homes genuinely enforce rigid division on these stairways constantly, or whether practical workarounds repeatedly bend the guidelines. But the intention in the construction is simple to recognise. One staircase is built to be appreciated. This one is built to be endured. At the peak, the hallway divides like a creek, attempting to determine which direction to flow. Slim doors open to tiny bedrooms wedged beneath the rafters, staff sleeping areas that press up against the roofline. Angled ceilings force tall individuals to stoop, and small windows peer out over the grounds in a manner that must be gorgeous and maddening simultaneously. Picture waking to dawn over the lawns, but understanding you will pass most of the day in the cooking spaces or cleaning fireplaces. Numerous staff occupy these cramped chambers. 2 cots, perhaps 3, a basin and a chest or hook for each individual. Solitude is an indulgence that tends to reside downstairs with the proprietors. You picture hushed exchanges after dark, giggles muffled in pillowcases so they don't float down to the hearing of the head housekeeper. You proceed along the upper hallway and discover peculiar little details built into the surfaces. A miniature door scarcely half your stature leading into a crawling area where chests and discarded furnishings collect grime. In certain homes, these areas wind up holding curiosities, damaged playthings, aged caps, or abandoned ornaments that nobody quite desires to discard. Sometimes you might discover a forgotten object that seems like the beginning of a supernatural tale. A solitary boot, an incomplete letter, a figurine with one glass eye absent. It's all perfectly rational and still somewhat eerie, like the home is maintaining a small archive of its own recollections. Further along, you notice miniature square openings set elevated beside the ceiling with a perspective into a bigger, more refined chamber. It's not positioned for aesthetics. In particular homes, observation holes permit staff to watch visitors, be prepared to enter at the precise right instant with beverages, or observe the advancement of a supper without repeatedly stepping inside. Certain butlers and housekeepers utilize these vantage spots to interpret the atmosphere, determining whether to deliver more spirits or fewer disturbances. You envision someone quietly watching a heated exchange from this concealed position, attempting not to sneeze and destroy the whole arrangement. It's equally practical mechanism and bargain surveillance operation. Another stairway descends again, this occasion into lower sections of the home where rock substitutes, timber and the atmosphere chills as though the structure has its own subterranean climate. Cellars in Victorian homes often tangle together, storage chambers, wine vaults and passages that can seem like a labyrinth. You move past racks where pork might suspend, shelves loaded with jams, bags of grain and coal containers, everything organised according to a system that only the workers fully grasp. There are accounts of big properties, with tunnels extending outside, utilised to bring in supplies without disrupting the polished front pathway, or to transport laundry to separate buildings. Some of these tunnels wind up rumoured to be contraband routes or hidden escape passages, though they're typically just the sensible solution to the challenge of dirt and separation. Along one hallway, a thick wooden shaft contains a dumbwaiter, a compact elevator that groans up and down between levels, transporting plates, coal, or occasionally just messages and small objects. You pull the little door and gaze inside at the cord and stage, picturing a dish of meticulously organised sweets swaying softly as it journeys, an unspoken wish suspended over it that none of the confections choose to go soaring. In richer or more updated homes, speaking pipes might accompany these arrangements. Metal tubes that wind from one level to another so that someone can yell directions instead of dispatching a person. It's the 1800s concept of immediate communication, complete with the sporadic confusion when a phrase gets lost in the reverberations. You trail the hallway toward the noise of rattling dishware and elevated voices that don't attempt to remain courteous. An abrupt turn exposes a door with flaking paint and more indicators of damage than any in the guest chambers. Behind it sits the servants' hall, the location where those who operate the home finally rest, consume and converse like genuine humans instead of portion of the decoration. The surface is lengthy, the bench is firm, and the mood can transform from rigid formality under the butler's gaze to explosions of amusement when he departs. Placement here mirrors status, exactly like in the grand eating chamber, but the accounts shared are vastly different. You detect that the genuine narrative of the home is composed at this surface, not on embossed cards. Back in the passages, feline doors carved into the foundation of some surfaces suggest a silent battle against rodents. There are accounts of specific house felines becoming almost legends among the workers, recognized by designation, resentments, and preferred resting locations. One feline might select the heated peak of the laundry copper as its throne. Another might claim a particular footman as personal cushion. Animals officially belong to the household above, but unofficially they wander everywhere, disregarding class divisions far more successfully than any human can. You step around a bowl, positioned near the baseboards, and trust its proprietor is in a charitable disposition at last. You halt in a small junction where multiple staircases converge, one ascending towards sunlight, another spiralling further down, a third slipping sideways to the unexplored. Here the aroma of wax combines with coal powder, and the surfaces bear faint marks of years of palms stabilizing themselves mid-movement. The estate reveals itself as a stratified organism, nerves and vessels concealed behind formal exterior. Up above are looking glasses, light fixtures, and deliberately selected drapes. Here are weathered planks, scraped edges, and shortcuts that very few guests ever witness. You stand in the junction of these realms, hearing footfalls above and below, and sense how profoundly this location depends on its secret paths and invisible travels. You trail the subtle draw of warmth and the aroma of sustenance, moving along a hallway that gradually illuminates. Voices murmur forward, subdued and deliberate, like individuals attempting very hard to sound composed before caffeine. The door you approach is not as impressive as the front portal, but buffed enough to reflect a fuzzy version of your features. When it swings, you enter into the morning realm of the Victorian estate, the platform arranged for breakfast, where the day officially commences for the individuals who are intended to be observed. Illumination descends through tall openings, paler and softer than at noon, capturing dust particles that drift lazily above the surface. A flame burns in the hearth, not blazing, just sufficient to eliminate the edge off the cold. The aroma in the chamber is distinct from the remainder of the home, a mixture of bread, tea, eggs, and the unmistakable trace of something smoky that might be pork or herring or both. This is not a rapid snack seized in transit. In numerous 1800s middle and upper tier homes, breakfast is still a considerable event. Eggs, proteins, breads, occasionally seafood or oatmeal, because individuals anticipate to pass a lengthy day navigating through social obligations, commerce, or endless household responsibilities. Your belly, which has been respectfully silent until now, abruptly recalls it exists and submits an urgent protest. The surface itself informs you that breakfast has guidelines just as much as supper, only in gentler tones. Instead of blazing with tapers and gleaming with silver, it displays a tidy white fabric, plain flowers, and deliberately positioned utensils. At one extremity, near the individual who manages the home, stands a sideboard loaded with covered vessels. Vapour spirals from beneath silver covers, suggesting at scrambled eggs, cooked tomatoes, and possibly a vessel of kedgeree, that Anglo-Indian rice and seafood combination that appears on numerous Victorian breakfast surfaces. Bread appears in fragile open holders that keep each portion divided so it doesn't turn damp, an innovation that appears absurdly particular until you recall that crisp bread is apparently a vital foundation of civilization. You grab for a portion and sense the strange delight of something both crunchy and ridiculously overmanaged. Household members drift in according to their status and practices. The master might emerge with a folded newspaper wedged under his limb, already portion of his daily protection. The mistress assumes a position that indicates her standing. Often near the tea service, in numerous Victorian homes, she oversees the container, determining when to pour and for whom, transforming an ordinary beverage into a miniature ceremony of authority and attention. Tea itself bears the phantom of empire in its foliage, cultivated in remote plantations and transported back in containers that travel through ports and storage facilities before discovering their route into delicate cups. Children materialize at the surface if they are mature enough and regarded well-mannered enough, clothed neatly, hair controlled, eyes slightly cautious of the inevitable corrections about bearing. You, as visitor or household, slip into your designated location, the seat silently waiting as though it already understands all your mysteries. Staff move around the perimeter of this silent performance. A housemaid brings in fresh pitchers of milk and heated water. A manservant stands prepared to remove covers, distribute dishes and refill cups, gaze trained not just on requirements but on temperaments. In a strictly managed home, dialogue doesn't begin in earnest until everyone is positioned, and perhaps until someone recites grace. A familiar blessing suspends in the atmosphere for a few moments. Then the chamber exhales, utensils clink, and discussion begins. Scholars still debate whether most Victorian breakfast surfaces are genuinely rigid and ceremonious or whether later fiction and memories exaggerate this mood. But abundant journals suggest that courtesy rarely takes a morning break. The Morning Gazette arrives as another small occurrence. Messages and notes are stacked on a tray and delivered in to be allocated. Envelopes, some thick with commerce, some delicate with refined handwriting, glide to their destinations like little paper dramas. Publications join the scene too. By the mid-1800s, cheaper printing and wider literacy generate a flood of daily and weekly papers. Individuals skim headlines about government, empire, wrongdoing and style, then selectively share fragments that seem safe or amusing. You might hear someone recite aloud a ridiculous advertisement, a solution for hair loss, or a wonder tonic guaranteeing to repair everything except probably your doubt. Someone else rustles through the sheets in pursuit of market prices or parliamentary discussions. It's a strange blend of worldwide occurrences and neighbourhood bread trails, each individual selecting which accounts get to influence their day. Rumours seep into the chamber like another slightly spicier dish. At first it's wrapped in courteous worry. So did you learn about Mrs. What's her name? She hasn't been observed riding in the gardens lately. Then it glides towards sharper boundaries. A relative has wed surprisingly rapidly. A neighbour's offspring has departed university under somewhat mysterious circumstances. A visiting woman has been observed strolling with the incorrect individual at the incorrect moment. These accounts circulate almost as rapidly as the breakfast dishes, and just like the eggs, they're best delivered warm. You attempt not to appear too keen, but your hearing is absolutely paying notice. There's a delicate skill here to expressing something interesting without ever openly confessing to trouble. Children, if present, absorb this system early. They're anticipated to communicate when addressed, to not disrupt, and absolutely never reference anything scandalous they've caught from nursemaids. Mistakes are met with calm adjustments or the silent terror of a lifted eyebrow. The instructor, if she consumes here, remains a little separated, responding questions about instruction or advancement, keeping her speech exact. She maintains on that strange tightrope between workers and household, welcomed into the chamber but not completely into its emotional core. Her seat is a reminder that position at this surface is not just about wealth, but about a network of anticipations so delicate you can almost overlook it until you land on the incorrect thread. Sustenance keeps emerging, giving the vision and the belly plenty to accomplish. There might be containers of dense marmalade with fragments of orange skin shining like little stained glass panes, pork spirals on dishes, boundaries crisped to the precise point someone once proclaimed ideal. Cold proteins left from last evening's supper materialize in new configurations, sliced and reshaped so they appear like an entirely distinct dish. Sometimes something peculiar by modern measures makes an entrance. Spiced kidneys with a punch of seasoning or a mysterious potted mixture whose finest quality is that it tastes superior than it appears. Somewhere on the surface, a sugar container radiates with enticement, prepared to transform any beverage into dessert for the sleep-deprived. Little customs anchor the dish. The master may unseal his messages only after completing his egg. The mistress may not pour herself tea until she has presented it to everyone else. A youngster might be permitted precisely one spoonful of preserve. You observe how frequently palms hesitate over dishes, while gazes flick to the individuals in authority, checking silently if a remark landed well or if a small error has been pardoned. You also observe the more amusing aspect, the relative who consistently drops fragments on the identical bit of fabric, the elder who insists on relating the identical silly tale about a mischievous bird every Sunday, the manner a shared grin can illuminate the chamber for a few moments. Even in a realm of rigid manners, humans cannot resist inserting jokes below the exterior. The labour continues in exact waves in the cooking spaces, cooks and housemaids, just timing so vessels arrive heated but not scorched, replenishing the sideboard with a choreography that depends on constant rehearsal. If someone unexpectedly determines to remain, instructions filter back down. More coffee, another dish of bread. If a visitor turns out to detest seafood, that inclination may quietly circulate through the staff network, so future courses avoid it. A solitary dropped dish would resonate louder here than a shouted dispute, so palms move deliberately, with thoughts racing to stay ahead of necessity. When dishes finally drain, utensils rest and cups sit depleted except for a swirl of tea residue or coffee sediment, the enchantment begins to dissolve. Seats scrape softly, individuals stand, and the chamber transforms from shared custom to separate trajectories. Commerce visits, message composition, needlework instruction, the day expands out in numerous directions, but the breakfast surface has completed its labour. It has nourished frames, allocated information, and refreshed the invisible chart of who is irritated at whom, who is prospering, and who might require observation. You abandon your seat, sensing the faint warmth remaining in the padding, and bear the flavour of bread and discussion with you as you step back into the hallway. Hallways pull you toward quieter chambers, the variety that seem to respire more gradually than the remainder of the home. One entrance opens on a location that smells of leather grime and pipe smoke that stubbornly refuses to depart, no matter how frequently the openings are split. Tall bookcases climb along the surfaces, their ledges lined with volumes in dark covers, titles stamped in gold that quietly suggest at Latin, law, science, and the sporadic, very dramatic fiction. Pretending to be serious literature, you've entered into the library. This chamber belongs, at least officially, to the masculine realm. In numerous respectable 1800s households, the library and adjacent workspace or smoking chamber form the nucleus of the male territory, a location where the master might conduct commerce, peruse newspapers, and pretend to contemplate very profound thoughts, while mostly questioning why the coal expense is so elevated. The seats are substantial and profound, upholstered in dark materials that conceal marks and project power. You descend into one and sense the padding take you slightly captive, as though they have firm opinions about you departing before you complete a full section. On the composition surface, pens and inkwells align beside neatly stacked parchment. Messages composed here might journey across Britain by locomotive or cross oceans on steamships, bearing instructions about factories, investments, or remote colonial ventures. The Victorian era witnesses a massive expansion of print civilization, and libraries like this fill with encyclopedias, journey books, and thick biographies of significant men who probably never completed their own washing. Scholars still debate whether most proprietors actually peruse a big portion of these volumes or simply accumulated them as a visible badge of intelligence. But the organised rows certainly generate an impressive backdrop for contemplating features. You sense unusually scholarly just by existing in the identical atmosphere as so numerous serious spines. Little details grant the chamber its comfortable disorder. A metal ashtray perches near a seat faintly marked by cigar tips, A sphere sits in one edge, its faded shades showing continents tinted according to imperial interests, with a quantity of crimson scattered around for British territories. Someone has wedged a pressed fern between the sheets of a book, now fragile and spectral, transforming botany into a surprise bookmark. On one ledge sits a reading platform, cleverly hinged so a particularly massive volume can be propped open without demolishing your forearms. It's a reasonable adaptation, though you still suspect at least one individual has fallen asleep mid-perusal and headbutted the thing. A hallway away, the mood transforms. You enter into a chamber that seems to have been decorated by sunlight and dialogue rather than oak and ink. The drawing chamber spreads out in gentler shades, floral or striped materials, lighter timbers, perhaps a suggestion of gilt. This is the chamber where females of the household are anticipated to pass much of their social hours, especially in the afternoon and evening, welcoming callers, composing messages, embroidering and handling the fragile commerce of dialogue. The very designation comes from the concept of withdrawing after dishes to a more personal location, although the privacy here is relative and full of gazes. Low surfaces hold needlework containers, card diversions, and albums of calling cards and photographs. The popularity of the carte de visite, small photographic portraits exchanged like social currency, means that numerous drawing chambers accumulate entire collections of features, relatives, celebrities, and mildly famous authors who appear like they haven't rested in 3 days. You flip through a pile and question how numerous individuals secretly rank these images from most to least attractive. On ledges by the flame sit novels by authors like Dickens and the Bronte sisters, occasionally concealed behind more respectable-appearing covers. If a title seems a bit provocative for casual exhibition near the opening, the piano waits, gleaming and slightly satisfied. Music presents one of the limited approved forms of performance for respectable young females, so hours vanish into rehearsal and courteous recitals. Visitors may be requested to listen after supper, palms folded, nodding appreciatively as fingers stumble over keys. You picture the tension of understanding that one incorrect note might be recalled far longer than a clever observation. A fringed piano fabric drapes over the peak, decorated with embroidery or tassels that threaten to tickle your ankles if you position too close, like a friendly but clingy drape. One quirky practice of the era involves covering almost every horizontal exterior with such textiles, lace and little mats, so that furnishings begins to appear slightly anxious about catching a chill. The placement arrangement here is its own dialect. Sofas and seats angle toward each other to encourage dialogue, with small surfaces perfectly positioned for teacups and dishes. Visitors may be steered gently and with great courtesy toward companions regarded suitable. A young woman is not going to be positioned beside the most notorious charmer unless someone is sensing very daring. In numerous households, antimacassars, those small lace or fabric portions, shield seatbacks from hair oil, particularly the popular macassar oil. It's practical, yet the designation sounds just exotic enough to make you envision a mysterious gentleman named Macassar who travels around embracing furnishings. You resist the impulse to inspect your own hair for proof. Adjacent to each other, these chambers display how powerfully Victorian society invests in the concept of separate domains. Males are associated with labour, government and the rougher atmosphere of the outside realm. Females are envisioned as guardians of the domestic domain, nurturing, ethical and beautifully organised like the padding. Scholars still debate whether this separation was experienced as rigidly as etiquette guides and moral essays describe, or whether daily existence constantly blurred the boundaries through shared obligations, personal ambitions and practical compromise. Either manner, the estate's design quietly channels individuals towards particular roles, utilising wallpaper and upholstery as subtle indicators. Even the smaller sitting chambers bear this system. A morning chamber, often utilised by the mistress of the home, might be filled with account ledgers, pattern portions, and messages about charity labour. From here, she could supervise household expenditures, plan courses with the cook, and handle the parade of tradesmen who deliver groceries, coal, and other necessities. This combination of refinement and logistics transforms her into a sort of domestic administrator, portion host, portion financial officer, maintaining respectability with constant determination. The attractive drapes and padding present a gentle disguise for spreadsheets that don't yet exist. Sometimes a household adds a chamber that disrupts the pattern a little. Perhaps there's a small studio where someone sketches landscapes or experiments with watercolours, paint containers stacked on a side surface. Perhaps a conservatory opens off the drawing chamber, filled with exotic vegetation that generates warm humidity. A variety of indoor wilderness where visitors can stroll and admire ferns, palms and orchids. The Victorian passion for gathering rare species feeds into this, and occasionally vegetation is exhibited with miniature labels, as though the drawing chamber has cultivated a miniature botanical garden. You stroll among the greenery and sense like you've entered into a greenhouse that determined it desired to absorb etiquette. As you navigate from the library's smoky calm to the drawing chamber's patterned chatter, you sense how each location both welcomes and restricts you. One chamber encourages perusing and personal contemplation, the other encourages social performance and deliberate listening. Together they structure a big portion of existence in the estate, guiding individuals into roles defined by gender, class, and the very positioning of seats. The surfaces never communicate, but every shade, padding, and ledge quietly informs you what version of yourself to deliver. Inside, you trail a path of warmth and commotion that pours down through the core of the home like the structure itself is exhaling. The stairs you navigate are slimmer, the atmosphere denser, and with each movement the aroma of sustenance, soap, and coal grows stronger. When you arrive at the foundation, you're in the cooking spaces, the genuine engine chamber of the Victorian estate, where days are calculated not in hours but in dishes. The initial thing you sense is the heat. A massive cast iron range extends along one surface, openings of flame behind iron doors, kettles and saucepans simmering on every flat exterior. In numerous 1800s homes, ranges like this substitute open hearths, utilising coal for steady heat that can roast, bake and boil all at once. You move in close and your face tingles, heat rippling through air that soaks into your bones and makes leaving feel impossible. The cook, pink-cheeked and sure of herself, circles this iron monster like it's a moody companion she's known forever. She reads temperature through instinct, through the scent of grease meeting metal, through bubbling water sounds, through years of memory carved into her muscles. The kitchen pulses with life around her. At a scrubbed wooden table, a young maid attacks vegetables with fast, clean cuts. Carrots and onions stack up in bright and pale heaps, while her blade thumps steadily against wood. Another maid whips eggs in a bowl, her wrist spinning in tight, practiced loops, the mix gradually turning into something smooth and shining. You catch the smack of dough as someone works bread, pressing and turning flour that drifts up like a miniature blizzard. This labour begins long before anyone upstairs remembers they're hungry. By mid-morning, preparations are rolling for lunch, tea and dinner, as though the house exists in an eternal cycle of cooking and recovering from cooking. The pantry branches off the kitchen into a cool side chamber. You walk in and feel the air chill, like stepping into a shadowed grotto. Shelves climb the walls, crowded with jars of preserves and pickles, lines of jams shimmering in shades of crimson and gold, carefully sealed with wax against spoilage. The Victorian passion for preserving fruit means even in winter, breakfast tables sparkle with jams and marmalade saved from summer gardens. You spot labels written in careful script blackcurrant gooseberry damson, every jar arranged so precisely you suspect quiet competition over whose preserve looks finest. Some jars show tiny flaws, caught bubbles or streaks, small edible marks that whisper of hurried days and exhausted hands. Past that sits the larder, colder still, with stone slabs keeping meat, milk and other perishables as fresh as manageable in an era before electric cooling. Bacon sides dangle from hooks, cheese wheels rest beneath muslin, and somewhere a faint fishy smell reminds you the ocean doesn't politely pause. Near the shore, ice might come from an ice house on the property where winter blocks have been tucked in sawdust, or from commercial ice shipments that grow more common in the late 1800s. Historians continue debating whether most households manage food safety reasonably well with these techniques, or whether typical Victorian meals are far riskier than anyone wants to acknowledge. But you notice how much effort pours into preventing everything from rotting. Back near the roaring range, the cook commands a small force. She's often a commanding presence in the household, second only to the butler in many situations, because the family's stomachs rely straight on her abilities. Menus spread before her like battle plans: roast fowl, boiled beef, soups, puddings, sauces, each assigned to a day and a course. Victorian cookbooks can be massive, packed with recipes featuring vague directions like cook in a quick oven or stir until done, forcing the cook to depend on experience rather than exact temperatures. You observe her sample a sauce with a spoon's edge, eyes narrowing as she determines it needs a dash, more salt and maybe the smallest pour of wine. In a corner, copper pots dangle, polished to the point of pride, each one gleaming like an award. Maintaining that brightness isn't merely decorative. Tarnish can mess with taste, so some households embrace strange methods like scrubbing them with vinegar and salt, or even with leftover tomato ketchup to strip discoloration. You imagine a kitchen maid carefully applying a condiment meant for sausages onto an expensive pot and can't help grinning. It's the sort of practical weirdness that runs quietly beneath all this refinement. At the room's far end, the scullery resembles the damp, worn-out relative of the kitchen. This is where the toughest and least glamorous labour occurs. Mountains of pans, plates and cutlery waiting to be cleaned in deep stone basins. Steam climbs in thick clouds as hot water splashes and brushes scrape. Scullery maids labour with hands that are perpetually chapped raw from soap and heat. They rinse greasy pans, scrub stubborn bits off roasting trays, and handle the messier aspects of animal preparation. It's hard not to admire anyone who can make metal gleam again after an evening of gravy and ambition. Along one scullery wall, rows of plates stand in wooden racks, blue and white patterns gazing back like a crowd of tiny porcelain faces. Above them, hooks hold ladles, strainers and colanders, each suspended in its precise spot. The organisation here borders on fanaticism, because misplacing a key tool at the wrong instant can wreck an entire meal. If you grab a bowl from a stack, someone will notice exactly which one and where you return it. Labels might not be marked on the shelves, but everyone knows the invisible blueprint. While you look on, a boy rushes in, hauling coal, his arms dusty and his hair streaked with black. He empties the scuttle into a bin for the range and small clouds bloom, leaving flecks of soot on nearby surfaces. Coal dust is the kitchen's permanent foe, drifting into corners, settling on ledges, turning white aprons grey by midday. Yet coal is what maintains the ovens hot, the kettles boiling, the irons ready, so it's both nightmare and necessity. You notice how regularly someone wipes a cloth across a surface, not because it's obviously dirty, but because the war against invisible grit never stops. On a nearby table, a jelly mould waits, an elaborate copper form that promises a wobbly triumph. Later, Victorian diners develop a serious fondness for moulded dishes, both sweet and savoury, turned out with proud ceremony so the pattern displays on the trembling surface. Fruit jelly towers, fish-shaped salmon moulds, pillars of blancmange, all designed to look spectacular before they're attacked with spoons. You picture one of these quivering creations making its trip upstairs, everyone silently hoping it doesn't slide ungracefully onto the carpet. The sounds in the kitchen create their own symphony. Knives thump, water splashes, Spoons clink against bowls. Cooks issue orders. Maids respond. And some days the rhythm includes laughter. Other days, tight silence. News from above trickles down. A guest has shown up unexpectedly. The master despises a certain dish. The mistress has asked for a particular pudding. Each fresh bit of information ripples through the space, adjusting tasks and timings. The kitchen is where the house's emotions are translated into real outcomes. A sulk upstairs might mean an emergency tray of comforting food. An important visitor can mean hours of additional dishes and very aching feet. Yet even here, with all the tough work and rigid expectations, little fragments of personality peek through. A maid hums a tune while she peels potatoes. Someone has tacked a funny sketch beside the door, perhaps a clumsy caricature of the butler looking stern with a teacup balanced on his head. A cook maintains a lucky spoon or a favourite pot that absolutely must be used for certain recipes, or they simply won't turn out right. Tradition mixes with superstition until it's hard to distinguish which is which. Standing in this warm, bustling space, you realise that everything refined that appears upstairs begins here, amid heat, clatter and endless repetition. The fine silver domes, the delicate sauces, the fluffy puddings, they all start with sweat, coal, and someone's aching hands. The Victorian mansion might present itself to the world in velvet and silk, but in the kitchen it wears an apron, rolls up its sleeves and smells of onions. You step into a quieter corridor and feel a different kind of structure settle around you. Here, away from the carved railings and silk wallpapers, people still discuss rank, but the names on the chart are butler, housekeeper, cook and maid, instead of lord and lady. The mansion has its own internal ladder, and everyone who labours here knows exactly which rung they occupy, how far they might ascend, and how far they could tumble with one bad mistake. It's like existing inside a very intricate board game, where the rules are written in worn boots and key rings instead of ink. Domestic service is one of the largest employers in Victorian Britain, with hundreds of thousands of people, especially young women, labouring as servants in townhouses, country houses and modest homes. In big places like this, the top of the servant hierarchy shines with a certain stern glamour. The butler commands the male staff, the housekeeper manages the female staff, and together they form a sort of parallel government. Under the same roof, their power doesn't show on visiting cards, but it absolutely shows in who can tell whom to polish the silver again because they missed a spot. The butler sits at the peak of this structure, a guardian of the wine cellar, the plate, and the smooth operation of formal life. He reports directly to the master of the house, but in practical terms he often runs the show. Below stairs he schedules footmen, oversees the pantry, and determines who is trustworthy enough to carry what. Wages for a senior butler can be substantial, especially when tips and gifts from grateful guests are quietly tallied. He knows which vintages are locked away for special occasions and which can be used more freely, a knowledge that gives him a subtle gravity. His voice is rarely lifted. A slightly cool glance from him can feel worse than an outright scolding. You suspect his eyebrows have dismissed more people than his actual words. Beside him, in authority, stands the housekeeper, addressed as Mrs., even if she never married. Her keys jingle softly at her waist, a small constant reminder that she controls linen stores, cleaning supplies, and many of the locked cupboards in the house. She maintains ledger books, recording sheets, towels, curtains, and the never-ending procession of soap, candles, and polish. If something is absent, she'll notice. She interviews new maids, examines references, and determines who seems likely to work hard without causing trouble. Cooks and housekeepers sometimes clash over authority, especially when budget limits collide with ambitious menus. Yet they also often depend on each other as the only people who fully grasp the pressure of operating such a big machine. Next are the specialists. The cook, especially in a wealthy home, holds serious status. A truly talented one may be pursued almost like a celebrity, stolen from one household to another with the promise of higher wages and better conditions. A lady's maid or a valet serving a single family member also stands high. They handle personal clothing, grooming and small private tasks. Seeing their employers unguarded in dressing gowns and bad moods, that closeness can make them trusted confidants or lightning rods for frustration. A valet might arrange cufflinks and quietly remove a stain before anyone else spots it. A lady's maid might style hair, repair gowns, and ensure that jewellery is positioned exactly where it should sparkle. Historians continue debating whether these intimate roles create real bonds of affection or, mostly, layers of practiced politeness with a paycheck underneath. Beneath that come footmen, those decorative and useful figures in liveried coats. They serve at table, open doors, carry heavy dishes, and accompany carriages. Height and appearance can matter when they're hired because uniformed staff are part of the house's public image. Some families even number them by seniority: first footman, second footman. Like a theatrical cast list, their livery is often padded at the calves, encouraging a nicely shaped leg in tight breeches, a detail that quietly transforms them into moving advertisements for the household. There are stories of footmen standing on tiptoe when measured, determined to meet a preferred minimum height, which is dedication on a level with modern people trying to look taller in online photos. Then there are the maids, whose work touches every corner of the building. Housemaids rise early to clean grates, haul coal, beat rugs and dust everything that catches the light. Parlour maids focus on more public rooms, polishing glass and handling finer china and silver. Kitchen maids prepare ingredients and do much of the heavy cleaning between courses. Scullery maids scrub pots and pans, living what might be the toughest routine of all, constantly soaked, constantly moving. Many are teenagers or in their early 20s, sending part of their wages home to families who rely on them. Their day can stretch from before dawn to late at night, with only short breaks and perhaps one half-day free each week. Rules thread through this hierarchy like wire. Curfews dictate when servants must be back in the house if they venture out. Romantic entanglements are discouraged, especially between staff and their social superiors, with dismissal as a common threat. Visitors from outside are limited or banned entirely from certain parts of the property. Sometimes letters might be opened unofficially or at least quietly monitored, especially if an employer suspects trouble. The bells that ring from upstairs aren't just calls for service. They remind everyone that control reaches into every minute of the day. Yet within that structure, people still find ways to carve out small pockets of self-respect and humour. The servants' hall acts as the social heart of this world. Long tables with plain chairs and simple crockery transform several times a day from a place of quick meals to a stage for stories. Seating follows rank, with butler and housekeeper at the head, then staff arranged in careful order. Meals here are consumed more quickly than upstairs, but conversation can be livelier once the highest-ranking figures leave. Voices loosen imitations of fussy guests, reenactments of dramatic moments at dinner, and quiet jokes about confusing new fashions ripple through the crowd. Someone might attempt a silly accent, collapsing into laughter when they botch it. Someone else might sing a fragment of a popular song while clearing plates, the melody hanging like steam after the room falls silent. Quiet rebellions slip into the cracks of routine. A disliked employer's letters might find themselves delayed by a few minutes when everyone knows they care deeply about punctuality. A footman might pour slightly smaller glasses of wine for a particularly rude guest, saving the better measure for someone kinder. A maid dusting a collection of ugly ornaments might place one just slightly askew, a tiny victory no one else will spot. Some servants sneak looks at newspapers meant for the family, catching up on news they're never expected to care about. Others borrow books cautiously and secretly, reading by candlelight until their eyes ache. Once in a while, a kitchen maid may taste a dessert with a little extra enthusiasm, just to verify the quality, purely in the name of professional pride, of course. Romance threads its way through this society too, in moments as small as a shared smile over a wash tub between a housemaid and a footman. Flirting can trigger real trouble if discovered. Yet feelings don't vanish simply because someone writes rules against them. There are stories of servants exchanging tokens, a ribbon, a handkerchief, a tiny sprig of dried flowers hidden in plain sight. At some large houses, servants' balls or dances happen at holidays, with borrowed music and improvised decorations giving staff a rare chance to dress as well as they can, and forget for a few hours which side of the silver they usually stand on. Ambition lives below stairs as much as anywhere. A scullery maid may dream of becoming a cook. A kitchen maid might hope to be a housemaid, then a parlour maid, working closer and closer to the public rooms where her efforts are more visible. A clever young footman might save wages to eventually open a small shop, watching how money moves in the household and quietly learning. Some succeed, others don't. But the dream of climbing just 1 or 2 steps higher is as present here as in any drawing room. You watch faces as they listen to orders, share jokes and snatch brief rests, and you sense whole inner lives moving just beneath the polite surface. The uniforms may match, but the dreams beneath them don't. You stand in front of a mirror that feels far too confident for this early in the day. The glass is slightly rippled, so your reflection wavers at the edges like it hasn't quite committed to existing yet. Beside you, a chair is buried under layers of clothing, each piece patiently waiting its turn to make your life more complicated. Victorian fashion isn't something you simply put on. It's something you negotiate with very carefully while trying not to curse. First come the underlayers, those quiet pieces that no one is meant to see but that secretly do most of the work. A chemise or shirt goes against your skin, cotton or linen that tries its best to keep sweat and soap away from the more expensive outer garments. Stockings reach up your legs, held by garters that pinch just enough to remind you they exist. For many women, a set of drawers adds another layer, fastened at the waist and open in the middle, a design that seems bizarre until you remember how many buttons and hooks would otherwise stand between you and a chamber pot. Men have their own version of this: long drawers, shirts with detachable collars, and socks that are determined to slide down at the most undignified moments. Then comes the piece that divides history into those who wore it and those who merely heard horror stories, the corset. Your maid brings it out with the calm fatalism of someone who has done this 1,000 times. The corset wraps around your torso, stiffened with whalebone or steel, fastened in front and laced in back. It's meant to support as much as squeeze, shaping your posture, smoothing the line of your bodice and helping carry the weight of skirt and petticoats. It's not supposed to fold your ribs like paper. Historians continue debating whether most women actually practice extreme tight lacing, or whether that image comes mainly from caricatures and a few very determined fashion addicts. But nearly everyone agrees that breathing deeply in full evening dress feels like an Olympic sport. Your maid pulls the laces steadily, pausing when you exhale, checking that you can sit and move without immediately fainting. You grip the bedpost and try to remember what a full lung of air felt like. Once laced, you add petticoats, generous layers that puff out your skirt and hide the structural tricks underneath. Earlier in the century, some women use enormous crinolines cage-like frames of steel hoops that hold skirts in a wide bell shape. Fashion plates love them, staircases and crowded rooms don't. There are documented cases of skirts catching fire when fabric brushes against open flames, especially near fireplaces and candles, which is exactly the sort of historical fact that makes you suddenly very conscious of your distance from anything that flickers. Later, fashions shrink the width and push the volume toward the back, with bustles, those padded or wired structures that create a dramatic silhouette behind you. Walking in all this feels somewhere between gliding and steering a small stubborn boat. Sitting requires careful aim. One wrong angle and you slide halfway to the floor. Accessories add their own little torments. Shoes look delicate and charming, but narrow toes and small heels mean your feet begin plotting revenge by mid-afternoon. Gloves must fit closely enough to be elegant, which makes getting them on a kind of fabric wrestling match, especially in humid weather. A hat pins to your carefully arranged hair, drawing attention while also plotting to launch itself into the nearest soup tureen if you tilt your head at the wrong moment. Hat pins become both fashion and practical weapon, long sharp decorations that keep everything in place and simultaneously give you the ability to defend yourself against anyone who underestimates how pointy a stylish person can be. For men, the suffering just looks different. Starched collars sit high and hard around the neck, fastened with studs that somehow always choose the moment you're running late to disappear under furniture. Cravats and later neckties must be tied smoothly in knots that signal taste and competence. Waistcoats fit snugly, coats follow, and by the time everything is buttoned, you feel like you've been wrapped in your own personal upholstery. A respectable Victorian gentleman may not wear a corset, although some do flirt with light versions to smooth their figure. But he does live his life with a ring of fabric and stiffening pressing firmly into his throat. It's elegance with a side order of slow strangulation. Cosmetics and grooming bring a quieter kind of risk. A pale complexion is still associated with refinement, which leads some people to use powders containing lead or other unpleasant ingredients. Lip and cheek products may contain carmine made from crushed insects, perfectly safe in small amounts, but a reminder that beauty can be much stranger than it looks. In advertisements, hair tonics promise strength and shine, while sometimes delivering irritation or dubious smells. One quirky craze involves fake beauty spots, tiny patches of fabric or velvet stuck to the face in deliberate positions, a fashion that revives older traditions and invites endless commentary about which placement is most flattering. You consider sticking one in the exact center of your forehead just to see who would pretend it looks charming. Odors are a daily battlefield in a world without deodorant as we know it, and with many more coal fires, horses, and crowded streets. Perfume and cologne help, but they're often dabbed on handkerchiefs or gloves rather than directly on the skin, creating scented clouds that trail behind people like polite weather. Some carry vinaigrettes, small containers with vinegar-soaked sponges that can be sniffed when smells become overwhelming. A crowded theatre or ball can be a swirling mix of sweat, soap, scent, feathers and warm fabric. Less a romantic haze and more a reminder that dense social life is always a little nose forward. You keep your own handkerchief close just in case, folded with a discreet sprinkle of lavender. Fans and canes turned into tiny signal systems. Folding fans carried by women can flick shut or open, tilt at certain angles or tap lightly against a wrist, gestures that magazines sometimes claim form a secret flirtation code. Whether anyone actually memorizes the supposed meanings or simply uses the fan to move air and hide boredom is another question entirely. Walking canes for gentlemen stretch from simple wooden staffs to fancy grips concealing secret spaces for blades or tobacco tins. Some folks wield them like silent accessories in their private theatre of respectability. Others simply appreciate having support when footwear and stone pavements disagree about cooperating. What people wear also announces rank and virtue. Sombre, plain materials hint at humility and function, particularly for mature women or anyone tied to religious devotion. Meanwhile, vivid shades and intricate decorations keep surfacing in style magazines fed by an expanding worldwide commerce delivering pigments, textiles and embellishments from distant continents. Factory-made clothing grows more available as mechanized manufacturing spreads, meaning not every garment gets individually fitted anymore. Still, for plenty in this residence, seamstresses and tailors remain absolutely central. Scholars keep debating whether ordinary folks back then felt trapped by dress codes or comforted by their structure and consistency. But journal records frequently show people meticulously noting their outfits and others' responses, evidence that garments transcend mere cloth. Once you finally finish dressing, hair arranged, fastenings secured, clasps hooked, and strings knotted, you sense you have solved an intricate riddle. With your own frame as the surface, you roll your shoulders and detect soft sounds, the murmur of material layers acknowledging each other. Each gesture becomes slightly more intentional now. Dropping into a chair too fast could wrinkle your dress. Slumping might fold your jacket awkwardly. Leaning too deeply might challenge your corset's tolerance, or your neckline presentation has turned into a constant project you transport into every space, a public declaration that you deserve a place in this grand house, even while your ribcage quietly questions that assertion. Afternoon descends on the estate like an extended, measured exhale. The weighty concerns of morning have evaporated. Substantial meals remain distant, and officially the moment for unwinding has arrived. Naturally, inside a Victorian home, unwinding follows protocols. Relaxation is not simply what occurs during empty hours. It becomes theatre involving teacups, game tables, and considerable upright posture. You register the transition initially in the sitting room. Daylight slants through towering windows, illuminating cushion tassels and dancing across buff surfaces. Somebody rings for tea, and soon a cart appears bearing an organised arrangement of cups, matching plates, a teapot, a hot water vessel, and a dish of cookies that seem impossibly small for genuine appetite satisfaction. Afternoon tea, particularly from the middle 1800s forward, transforms into a social ritual, a method for connecting lunch with delayed supper. You dispense or receive a cup, the light liquid spiralling with cream, and observe that even stirring carries unusual formality. No banging the utensil excessively, no noisy sipping. The cookies or maybe thin cake portions must be sampled cautiously, never devoured, regardless of appeal. Discussion begins on neutral territory, climate obviously. The condition of garden walkways, a fresh publication everyone claims to have finished. You may catch references to trains, that spreading system of metal routes shrinking distances and transforming journeys. Trips requiring days previously now consume hours, and folks grumble that rural landscapes vanish behind soot and velocity, while simultaneously purchasing passage eagerly. Someone might recount a recent expedition to a neighbouring town or health resort, framing the account as both daring and completely proper. You taste your tea and agree, sensing that subtle obligation to appear knowledgeable and moderately engaging without veering toward anything as crude as passionate conviction. Before long, cards and diversions emerge. A surface gets cleared, cloth-smoothed green felt straightened, and card decks shuffled with a crisp rustle of countless outcomes. Whist, a favoured pastime, requires focus and recall, with teammates communicating through played cards rather than spoken language. You settle down, examine your hand, and experience that peculiar blend of tedium and anticipation only subdued games deliver. Victory feels rewarding, defeat slightly humiliating, and regardless you perform the character of someone possessing sufficient leisure and security to invest deeply in rounds won through printed cardboard pieces. Scholars continue disputing whether these prolonged afternoons truly strengthened household connections, or whether numerous players secretly perished from cognitive fatigue, grinning pleasantly while their spirits retreated beneath furnishings. Additional pastimes drift through the space. Someone proposes charades, that theatrical guessing entertainment where expressions and phrases get performed wordlessly. Dignified women and men wind up portraying pirates, tempests, or celebrated verses, expressions contorting in manners never permitted during supper. When a typically stern uncle impersonates a foul Paulie, the chamber explodes with suppressed chuckling, everyone attempting not to spill beverages. Sitting room amusements like these surface in innumerable Victorian homes, offering chances for playfulness beneath a thin coating of cultured sophistication. Should you wander outdoors, the grounds present another style of leisure. Roots curve among flower beds and bushes shaped into orderly forms. The preference for landscaped terrain continues powerfully, with grass stretching toward tree clusters and strategically positioned plant groupings, concealing and exposing scenery. You walk along gravel pathways, parasol lifted when sun blazes or hat angled precisely. A groundskeeper in work sleeves stoops over a border, silently performing the actual labour making everything appear natural. At wealthier properties, glass structures showcase unusual plants, ferns, orchids and palms gathered from around earth. Plant collecting develops into a slight fixation, with certain proprietors displaying fresh varieties as proudly as others flaunt gems. You stop at a seat and absorb sounds. Birds sing from boughs, a far-off coach rumbles down the lane, and somewhere a turf roller drums slowly across grass, pressing earth into smooth propriety. The Victorian obsession with flawlessly maintained lawns gets powered by novel mechanical cutters transforming what was once demanding blade labour into a somewhat less frightening task. You observe a gardener operating one such device, blades spinning, and understand that even the peaceful green expanse beneath your feet requires constant toil. There exists a common jest that lawns primarily exist, allowing men to debate patterns and borders while pretending they are not merely avoiding indoor discussions. Minor retreats slip into this setting. A younger individual might roam farther than absolutely required, a volume tucked beneath their arm, seeking a sheltered spot where nobody demands perpetual courtesy. You discover such a location under foliage or within a concealed nook, and rest with your spine against masonry or trunk for several minutes. You permit your shoulders to release, your mind to drift without needing transformation into sharp observations. A story rests open across your knees, possibly a lending library selection, something containing adequate excitement and affection to interrupt the tranquility. Reading thus offers a mental passage into alternative existences, different locations, while your footwear stays definitely positioned on groomed pebbles. Sketchpads and embroidery rings surface too, artistic channels fitting neatly inside propriety boundaries. Drawing the vista from a platform, you attempt capturing a tree's outline or the residence's silhouette against sky. Within that focus, monotony dissolves. Stitching blossoms onto material, you trace designs inherited or purchased, converting thread into petals, and foliage eventually adorning pillow covers or clothing. Tales exist of individuals concealing secret communications in their needlework, minuscule initials or marks integrated into edges as private amusements or objections. Nobody glancing casually at the completed work would detect anything, yet the creator understands, which suffices. Back indoors, you might encounter the subdued activity of correspondence writing. Afternoon offers ideal timing for answering letters, and writing surfaces in morning chambers or offices hold stacks of stationery, ink containers and orderly piles of notes. You position yourself, submerge a pen and start the delicate process of addressing a companion or family member. Correspondence travels rapidly by railroad and steamship compared with previous times, and an entire tradition of steady letter exchange develops around that pace. Individuals preserve bundles of aged letters bound with ribbon, reviewing them during boring moments. One unusual habit involves cross-writing, rotating the sheet 90 degrees and writing across the initial text layer perpendicularly to economize on mailing costs and paper. You picture the unfortunate recipient squinting at pages filled with crossing lines, questioning whether fondness justifies the visual effort. Not everyone in the residence experiences afternoon as relaxation. Staff continue working in background patterns, replacing fireplace cinders, organising spaces, preparing for approaching meals. Still, even among workers, brief moments of reprieve can occur. A scullery worker might rest against a window ledge for a snatched instant of sunshine. A chamber attendant might halt at a hallway's terminus to stretch her spine and view trees barely visible through distant glass. These minute intervals do not appear in ledgers or invites, yet they exist, as genuinely as any formal pursuit. Privilege begins resembling surprisingly similar to confinement. The more you are anticipated to present as gracious and cultivated, the narrower your range of permissible behaviours grows. You cannot sprint down garden routes without provoking outrage. You cannot yawn expansively in the parlour, and you absolutely cannot confess you would prefer skipping the fifth card round and climbing foliage instead. Relaxation has converted into its distinct employment type, complete with uniform and dialogue. Still, in shadowed corners and subtle glances, individuals still discover methods for loosening that dialogue. A jest murmured behind a fan, a mutual eye movement when someone brags excessively, a game conducted with slightly more absurdity than etiquette manuals suggest. These represent minor resistances. You register them as small undercurrents beneath the placid exterior, reminders that humans retain their inherent vitality even within the most meticulously furnished environments. As afternoon extends onward, you navigate these strata of engagement and performance. Partially visitor, partially witness, observing how individuals labour intensely at accomplishing nothing. Evening accumulates around the estate with intentional flair, like it verified the attire requirements and chose appearing in velvet. Lamps get illuminated sequentially, gas fixtures or oil lamps igniting into a gentle amber radiance, transforming polished timber and silver into something nearly dramatic. The atmosphere acquires that distinctive fragrance of heated metal, tallow, and residual coal fumes. And throughout you witness, individuals are metamorphosing from their daytime personas into their most presentable iterations. Supper here transcends mere dining. It constitutes an examination, a spectacle, and a moderately nerve-wracking collective undertaking simultaneously. You commence in a chamber or changing area where evening attire awaits with smug composure. For numerous men, this indicates black tailcoat, stiffened shirt, vest, and precisely tied neckcloth or tie, the traditional dinner attire eventually developing into contemporary white tie. For numerous women, it indicates bodices shaped lower than daytime versions, sleeves abbreviated, materials richer, and adornments finally liberated from secure darkness of containers. Gloves become mandatory, elongated and sleek, producing the bizarre sensation of attempting consumption while your digits imitate porcelain. A servant or dresser ensures nothing appears askew. Every fastening sits correctly, every tie secured. Scholars continue debating whether individuals discover this ceremony predominantly glamorous or predominantly draining, yet anyone who ever struggled with a rigid collar recognizes the reality occupies somewhere between. Below, the dining chamber awaits. Already arranged, the surface gleams beneath fabric so meticulously smoothed it might demonstrate mathematics. Candles or gas chandeliers cast illumination along the centre, sparkling on glassware positioned like miniature crystal battalions. Silver utensils advance outward in precise formations, implements and blades arranged in usage sequence, commencing from exterior and proceeding inward. This serving manner, with courses delivered successively, gains popularity through the later 1800s, supplanting the previous tradition where numerous dishes crowded surfaces together. You examine the arrangement and suspect if someone relocated one utensil. Minimally 3 individuals would sense a disturbance in reality. Placement markers indicate where everyone must sit, a tiny folded indication that seating is not random but calculated. Who sits beside whom can influence standing, promote attachments, or subtly discipline transgressors with an evening alongside the most tedious relation accessible. The entrance opens and people arrive in a modest orchestrated sequence. A host or hostess extends an arm, guiding visitors to their positions. Discussion flows in preliminary, vivid, small explosions while everyone stands, then halts as seats get withdrawn. Once all occupy chairs, and, potentially following a quick blessing, the genuine labour commences. Broth appears initially, delivered by servers moving with rehearsed exactness. You raise your utensil, conscious that within this chamber your elbow's trajectory feels potentially reportable. Somewhere regulations exist for no slurping, no cooling the broth, no hunching over your dish like concealing yourself. Someone at the distant terminus bends these guidelines slightly, and you perceive the collective silent intake. Course pursues course, each deliberately selected fish, subsequently meat, then fowl, vegetables, sweet dishes, confections, potentially fruit and kernels, accompanied by wine. French dominates the menu, terms like potage, entrée, entremet, regardless of actual culinary skill variation. A fundamental reality lurking beneath the fabric is that Britain's prosperous households frequently borrow extensively from French cooking, employing French chefs where possible and copying French approaches where not. The dishes reaching you may not consistently match their title's theatricality, yet they definitely attempt. A peculiar element at certain tables manifests as specialised implement experiments, like oddly configured fish implements, whose genuine creation date and requirement remain contested, nevertheless allowing individuals to experience satisfyingly knowledgeable while managing bones between mouthfuls. The authentic competition unfolds through discussion. You are anticipated to converse with your right companion for one serving, then pivot leftward for subsequent ones, reversing trajectory like a social pendulum. Acceptable subjects encompass travel, musical arts, publications unlikely to offend anyone, contemporary matters approached with maximum wariness, and shared connections treated carefully. Frank discussion of finances, ailments, and governance should arrive wrapped protectively if referenced whatsoever. You attempt contributing sufficiently to appear animated, yet not excessively to monopolise the gathering. Humour must remain gentle, intelligent, and securely appropriate. You sense your mind labouring nearly as intensely as your digestion, monitoring who responds overly enthusiastically at whose comments, and who deliberately evades visual contact with whom. Servants move in and out, practically invisible when executing duties flawlessly. The head servant supervises beverages, monitoring glasses, and replenishing at optimal moments. Servers transport dishes with composure, masking how substantial those platters truly are. At certain residences, they even rehearse beforehand, balancing vacant dishes, perfecting their coordination. Occasionally mishaps occur: a dropped utensil, a leaked condiment, a glass that topples. Formally, this qualifies as a minor catastrophe. Informally, it constitutes the most thrilling occurrence all week. You glimpse the burst of alarm on a young server's expression as a sauce vessel wavers, then the immediate relief when it stabilizes. Somewhere in a corner, someone quietly pledges a dedicatory gesture to the deity of ceramics. At a particular juncture, frequently following dessert, supper divides along predictable patterns. The women retreat to the parlour, a courteous departure coordinated by the hostess, while men stay behind with fortified wine and heavier discourse. This arrangement, prevalent in numerous Victorian residences, reinforces the notion that substantial matters of commerce and governance belong to male domains, while female domains assume the function of ease and cultivation. Within the dining chamber, tobacco products may emerge, the atmosphere turning hazy with fumes, as discussions shift toward capital, elections, and intermittently accounts never shared in mixed gatherings. Within the parlour, tea and coffee move around, and individuals turn toward musical performance, embroidery, card diversions, and the variety of gossip politely disclaiming being gossip. Shortly the two currents reunite. Men enter the parlour, bringing with them a slight scent of tobacco and refinement. Now evening tilts toward amusement. Someone gets gently convinced to perform piano. A young lady occupies the bench, smoothing her garment, and initiates a composition by a trendy composer, perhaps something emotional and fluid. The chamber attends, some concentratedly, others with the indistinct expression of individuals who understand they must appear appreciative while mentally rehearsing their personal considerations. A minor yet satisfying reality is that many such compositions get acquired from printed music purchased in establishments treating fresh songs like continuing episodes of ongoing narratives. Acquaintances exchange music with one another, establishing invisible systems of common tunes. If not musical performance, then recitations may get offered. A visitor with capable voice might stand beside the hearth and present a verse or a novel segment incorporating sufficient theatrical quality to maintain attention without crossing into complete performance. Sitting room diversions belong here too, calmer than wild charades, possibly word challenges or narrative sequences, letting everyone demonstrate slight cleverness. Scholars continue disputing whether these regulated amusements genuinely enchanted participants or primarily concealed a steady drone of ennui. Yet you detect both possibilities interweaving through the chamber. Certain expressions illuminate with authentic pleasure. Others stare intensely at their beverage cups. Throughout everything, minor social manoeuvres persist. A casual observation here, a flattering remark there, an introduction arranged near the instrument. These instances construct partnerships, companionships, and occasionally courtships. Individuals evaluate not merely what you articulate, but how you attend, how rapidly you comprehend a jest, how smoothly you redirect discussion when conversation approaches prohibited zones. The estate itself appears to observe, its artworks and reflecting surfaces casting back your expressions as you traverse this elaborate competition. When finally the timepiece sounds and individuals begin drifting toward their chambers, you experience the distinctive weariness arriving from spending an evening simultaneously dining and performing. The candles diminish lower, the final musical notes vanish, and the social game board resets, prepared for another night. Night in the estate abruptly determines that ordinary illumination proves inadequate and embraces complete theatre. Workers scramble to light chandeliers, wall fixtures and candle stands until the residence radiates with gas and candle glow, making every surface appear more magnificent than during daylight. In the primary hall, flowers materialize in substantial containers, foliage ascends railings, and the buffed floor in the dance hall shines like it has been preparing for this occasion all year. You practically hear the house clearing its throat and declaring, "Observe this." You position yourself at the dance hall's periphery, absorbing the metamorphosis. Elevated ceilings vanish into gentle darkness while crystal fragments on chandeliers shimmer like imprisoned celestial bodies. Gilded mirrors reflect the luminosity, duplicating and triplicating the brilliance until you sense existing inside an ornament container. Musicians adjust their instruments on a modest elevation, the scraping of strings and quick musical scales piercing through the voice murmur. Grand evening gatherings like this constitute a foundation of upper and upper-middle tier Victorian social existence, particularly in the subsequent decades of the 1800s, when abundant families utilised them for displaying status, unmarried daughters, and how magnificent their polished floors appear beneath dancing footwear. Your invitation arrives on heavy cardstock, the lettering formal and precise, announcing when festivities will begin. Guests flow in through a carefully timed procession of coaches. Wraps are collected, gloves handed over, and the butler receives each name in hushed tones before calling it out to the assembled room. Every arrival becomes a small theatrical moment, that instant when a fresh face enters and the gathering silently renders judgment. Fans wave, monocles get repositioned, and somebody mentally rates every ensemble. You step into the social current wearing clothes that suddenly seem either excessive or inadequate, despite following the requested formality exactly. Music begins with recognisable rhythms, and bodies move in response. Quadrilles, polkas, and later waltzes populate the evening's schedule. The waltz, once thought scandalously close because partners embrace and turn together, has become perfectly acceptable by now, though certain elderly observers still watch with faint distrust, monitoring just in case. Dance cards materialize in gloved palms, compact booklets or firm cards secured with silk ribbon, each dance listed sequentially. Partners request permission to inscribe their names in available spots, and you discover how uncomfortable it becomes when spaces run out while someone stands waiting. The room transforms into a shifting tableau of colour and motion. Gowns billow outward like textile cascades. Black coats and tailored jackets navigate between them, and the glossy floor mirrors the movement until watching alone makes you slightly lightheaded. Musicians maintain expressionless faces professionally, even spotting particularly clumsy footwork toward the rear. A practical truth hiding beneath all this refinement is that numerous dancers rehearse fundamental steps privately or with teachers because nobody wants to become the individual who accidentally stomps off beat into an ornamental plant. You accompany your partner through rotations and walks, quietly celebrating each time you complete an entire dance without treading on anyone nearby. Chaperones perch like vigilant birds of prey, gazes keen behind their lace and gemstones. Their purpose extends beyond music appreciation to monitoring exchanges, ensuring nobody disappears into secluded spaces too extensively. Young ladies from respectable families must appear pleasant yet not forward, spirited yet not boisterous, appealing yet certainly not eager. Young gentlemen navigate equivalent expectations, meant to be considerate without seeming possessive, delightful without causing scandal. Historians continue debating whether these occasions primarily enforce rigid courtship customs or quietly generate chances for bolder flirtation than anyone acknowledges. Still, countless marriages clearly originate with a dance and a thoughtfully measured smile. In spaces like these, adjacent dining areas off the central hall provide brief sanctuary. Tables sag beneath cold meats, jellies, pies, and trifles constructed with custard and cream. Stemware stands prepared beside wine bottles, lemonade or punch. You manage a plate while sustaining conversation simultaneously, which seems nearly as intricate as any dance movement. Something faintly ridiculous emerges from consuming precisely arranged ham slices while wearing garments requiring an hour to secure. Yet appetite cheerfully dismisses propriety. One peculiar tradition in certain social circles involves elaborate table decorations, occasionally featuring carved ice or borrowed pineapples, those spiky specimens serving primarily as wealth indicators rather than actual refreshment. You suppress the impulse to lean closer and question whether the pineapple feels excessively qualified for this assignment. Returning to the ballroom, late evening starts blurring from heat generated by countless bodies. Lamps and candles accumulate warmth until every glass pane clouds around its perimeter. Staff discreetly open window frames, admitting cooler atmosphere, then secure them again. When someone mentions drafts, several guests flush somewhat pink, either from physical effort or steady wine consumption. The orchestra progresses through its program, occasionally repeating favoured dances when enthusiastic partner groups request them. You begin experiencing the satisfying soreness in your feet, indicating tonight's activity exceeded all those genteel afternoon strolls combined. Then arrive the subdued, peculiar intervals. In passages just beyond the primary commotion, voices lower. You might withdraw to recover composure, discovering you're not solitary. Two individuals stand beside a window, conversing in intense murmurs about a prospective betrothal. In an adjacent chamber, someone attempts composing their expression after unexpected correspondence delivered during festivities. Rumours and confidences circulate rapidly in such concentrated gatherings, and walls maintaining perpetual silence nonetheless appear to eavesdrop. A fallen fan or misplaced glove can initiate minor speculation because every item feels weighted with significance. When countless observers search for narratives, staff continue their relentless work behind everything. Footmen replenish glasses, transport trays, and occasionally contribute to music by tapping rhythm against flooring as they pass. Housemaids open windows, releasing smoke and warmth, then vanish before guests register their presence. The kitchen operates deep into darkness, generating refreshments before confronting the enormous dish collection that follows. For those labouring downstairs, a ball becomes among the lengthiest shifts conceivable, packed with minor crises, like a ripped hem requiring immediate repair or shattered glass swept away without disrupting dancers. As hours advance beyond midnight, the environment shifts once more. Guests grow more relaxed, laughter louder, and certain people dance with somewhat less accuracy and considerably more spirit. Several older relatives withdraw to calmer spaces, dozing in seats while maintaining their merely resting their vision. Young individuals resist exhaustion, determined against missing any waltz or whispered exchange. Tales suggest that at particularly magnificent estates, balls extend until sunrise, with guests emerging into early daylight, experiencing both exhilaration and slight unreality. You observe the tall windows, imagining them pale with approaching dawn, the chandeliers still glimmering in obstinate defiance of time. Eventually the evening dissolves, wraps return, headwear reappears, and the entrance hall fills with farewell rustling. Coaches advance, wheels grinding across gravel, lamps shining like small mobile constellations. People emerge into night atmosphere, complexions flushed, hair somewhat less immaculate than upon arrival, minds humming with fresh observations and potential futures. Did a glance signify something? Did a mutual jest matter? Will a name resurface on future correspondence? These questions accompany them homeward, tucked between silk folds and starched collars. Inside, as the final coach rattles into distance, the estate releases held breath. Music ceases. Candles diminish. Gas fixtures hiss downward. Staff commence the prolonged, gradual work of restoring the house to normal configuration, removing plates, straightening furniture, and methodically dismantling decorations. Petals descend from exhausted flowers. Crumpled dance cards finish forgotten in garments or tucked into memory boxes upstairs. You pause momentarily in the emptied ballroom, the floor marked with faint shoe traces, sensing the resonance of movement and murmurs suspended in atmosphere. The magnificent gathering has concluded, leaving only weary feet, abundant memories, and the impression that existence in this estate utilizes nights as vigorously as days. Morning illumination in the mansion appears different when someone suffers illness. It seems to pause at windows, entering gently instead of streaming across carpeting. Voices throughout passages diminish themselves without instruction, and every footfall near a particular door grows quieter. The chamber where sickness establishes itself becomes its own realm, dimmed and decelerated, hovering somewhat separate from breakfast conversation and refined routines. You stand at that entrance briefly, sensing the burden of what awaits within. The sick room carries scents of coal, fabric, and something more acute, a combination of vinegar, carbolic, and unusual herbal preparations. Drapes hang partially drawn, preventing draughts from reaching the bed. The patient rests elevated on pillows, complexion pallid, breathing shallow, surrounded by small items suddenly seeming critically important. A water glass on the nightstand, a broth bowl cooling beneath covering, a folded handkerchief decorated with miniature blossoms. Victorians exist with illness far more intimately than many individuals in subsequent centuries, and grave conditions receive home care rather than hospitalization. During the 19th century, hospitals can represent final options for impoverished people, not yet the sterile, advanced facilities you might envision for wealthy families. The bedroom transforms into the infirmary. A physician occupies a chair near the fire, coat meticulously brushed, medical bag at his feet. He examines the patient's chest, placing his ear directly against the body, or perhaps employing early wooden stethoscopes, instruments appearing disturbingly like miniature ear trumpets. He poses questions, checks pulses, and records observations in a compact notebook. Bloodletting declines in popularity by this period, yet numerous other treatments still balance uncertainly between beneficial and optimistic. You might hear earnest discussions regarding laudanum, an opium tincture administered for pain and coughing, or concerning poultices and plasters containing mustard camphor or other irritants intended to draw illness outward. Historians continue arguing whether such remedies genuinely enhanced outcomes, or served primarily to provide families the reassuring sensation that anything was being attempted around the bed. Domestic existence reorganizes itself. A nurse, sometimes professional, sometimes experienced staff, moves with consistent composure, sponging feverish brows or repositioning pillows. A family member assumes the overnight vigil, eyes grainy from remaining awake, listening for breathing changes. Furniture relocates, chairs advanced closer, tables positioned to support medicine containers, spoons and folded linens. The mantel clock seems amplified beyond usual, each tick a small acknowledgement that time continues, even when everything feels suspended. Beyond the chamber, people converse in undertones about contagion. Diseases like tuberculosis, typhoid, and scarlet fever haunt Victorian residences, and outbreaks can sweep through families. Windows may stand open for fresh atmosphere, or sealed completely, depending on which medical philosophy people trust. Some advocate ventilation, others favour blocking supposed miasmas drifting inward from contaminated air. Outside, you observe a maid cleaning a door handle with diluted disinfectant, expression furrowed as though simple cleaning could safeguard everyone. It might assist, or it might constitute just another gesture in the choreography of anxiety. Sometimes, illness prevails. On such days, the mansion transforms again. Curtains in front chambers are closed. Mirrors may be shrouded so they cannot reflect the deceased's face, and clocks in the chamber where death arrived might stop at the passing moment. A black crepe ribbon appears on the door knocker, signalling mourning to callers. The body, bathed and dressed in fresh garments, remains in the same bedroom, converted into a silent sanctuary. Callers arrive to express respects, smoothing gloves and seeking words, feeling both sincere and appropriate. Mourning garments emerge from wardrobes and tailors. For immediate relatives, particularly widows, the regulations are demanding. Black materials dominate wool and silk, matte rather than lustrous, sometimes worn for months or years, depending on relationship and social requirements. Black crepe decorates bonnets and veils, its coarse texture a grief symbol that presses into skin as much as it marks the site. Later in the morning interval, fabrics may soften toward greys and purples before life formally returns to colour. One unusual detail of this culture manifests in mourning jewellery pieces constructed with jet or onyx and frequently containing woven hair from the departed, lockets with tiny locks, bracelets pleated from strands, brooches with miniature portraits and hair secured behind glass. These objects transform remembrance into something literally worn on your wrist or against your chest. In the dining chamber and drawing room, conversation navigates carefully around the loss. Meals feel subdued. Laughter, when it emerges, startles everyone momentarily before they determine whether it's permitted. Letters dispatched to friends and relatives on black-bordered stationery, formal notices written in deliberate phrasing. Newspapers publish obituary entries listing accomplishments, qualities, and occasionally the type of sentimental language suggesting someone maintained a preferred touching phrase ready in a desk compartment. The house's material presence participates in this grieving. Extended corridors feel more extended when someone is absent from them. A fireside chair appears oddly theatrical when the customary occupant has departed. Ancestor portraits seem to observe with fresh intensity, their painted expressions sharing a silent fellowship with the newest addition to the family departed. There exists an old custom in some residences of maintaining a deceased person's photograph on the mantel or in a dedicated album, and this era witnesses the emergence of post-mortem photography, images captured of individuals after death. Sometimes they're arranged to appear sleeping, sometimes positioned upright among family. Historians continue debating whether these images were widespread comforts or comparatively rare practices later magnified into a morbid stereotype. Yet surviving specimens demonstrate that some families employ photography to preserve faces they cannot endure forgetting. At night, when candles extinguish and most people lie in their beds, the mansion can feel populated with absence. Floorboards creak as they perpetually do, but now someone listens for a recognizable step that never arrives. Wind passes chimneys and disturbs. Window frames and minds being minds promptly convert the sounds into whispers. It's simple to understand how ghost narratives flourish in houses like this. A faint cigar smoke scent where nobody has smoked for days. A beloved melody heard distant and soft. A door that swings closed without visible assistance. Perfectly ordinary drafts and resonances suddenly seem intimate. Someone will insist they've detected the rustle of a specific dress in a passage or the tap of a walking stick on tile. Stories about previous deaths attached to certain chambers. Perhaps a former proprietor died unexpectedly in the study, or a child was lost to fever in the nursery. Staff sometimes exchange tales while polishing glassware or cleaning grates. A housemaid might assert she experienced a cold area near the linen closet at midnight. A kitchen boy might decline going alone into a particular cellar section because of a sound he heard once and absolutely never desires hearing again. These narratives carry both dread and solace, suggesting that cherished ones don't entirely depart, that someone familiar still walks the corridors, even if only in memory-given form. Practical reality coexists with superstition. Executors examine papers in the study, reviewing wills dictating subsequent events. Clothes are distributed or modified, jewellery transferred down, books inscribed with notes about whose shelf they now occupy. The boundary between the living and the deceased runs directly through material belongings, converting wardrobes and writing desks into emotional hazards. You open a compartment to discover half-written correspondence, pen strokes frozen mid-thought, and experience an odd temporal jolt. As days advance, morning patterns gradually reintegrate into daily existence. Curtains open again, though perhaps not simultaneously. Laughter returns in tentative bursts, then more openly. Fresh routines establish where previous ones used to exist. Yet the mansion retains memory layers in its structure. Illness, loss, and quiet ceremonies leave impressions in how people regard certain doors or avoid specific phrases. At night, when lights dim and footsteps resonate, the house feels like it's remembering alongside them. Every creak, another page turned in, a narrative that contains the living and the deceased together. You wake one evening and recognise that the mansion's shadows appear different. They're crisper, less diffused, as though someone has taken a pen and redrawn every edge. Down the passage, light pours from beneath a door with a peculiar, constant brightness that isn't gas, isn't candle. When you step nearer, you observe the recent installation that has everyone voicing opinions. Electric light. The fixture on the ceiling appears almost bashful about its capabilities. Wires travel inconspicuously along the plaster, enclosed where feasible so callers needn't contemplate them. A glass covering surrounds a glowing filament, a tiny metal thread that hums with invisible power. Instead of wavering flames, you receive a constant white illumination that makes old paint shades look almost unfamiliar. In the late Victorian decades, electricity starts infiltrating wealthy residences like this, initially in several grand chambers, then more extensively as generating systems advance. It's costly, experimental, and sufficiently dangerous that everyone possesses a story about someone who touched the incorrect wire and regretted it. You attend the discussions swirling around this fresh brightness. Some household members adore it. No more grimy lamp chimneys, no more wick trimming, no more gas leaks spotting ceilings with grime. They commend the clear illumination for sewing, reading and examining jewellery. Others distrust it immediately. The radiance is too severe, they say. Unflattering to complexions and harsh to each tiny wallpaper wrinkle are complaints that it destroys the dinner atmosphere and makes gatherings feel like inspections. A compromise materialises in the shape of shaded bulbs and fixtures designed to resemble old candelabra, pretending nothing has actually changed, even as wires hum behind everything. Historians continue arguing whether early adopters embraced electric lighting mainly for comfort and security, or primarily as a status symbol to impress callers. Staff acquire a fresh set of concerns. The butler must now comprehend switches and fuses, alongside decanters and keys. A mistaken turn of a knob can plunge the most carefully planned dinner into abrupt darkness. Electric bells already travel along the walls for summoning staff, and now more intricate systems join them. In some residences, each level has a master switch panel, a mysterious board bristling with levers appearing suspiciously like a riddle. With no explicit instructions, someone must learn which switch governs which chamber, often through experimentation accompanied by startled exclamations every time the incorrect chandelier expires mid-sentence. Alongside electricity, plumbing starts weaving itself more thoroughly into the house. Bathrooms emerge where once there were only washstands and bowls. Porcelain baths with clawed feet shine invitingly, supplied by pipes that gurgle with hot and cold water. At surprisingly brief notice, flushing toilets materialise with their elevated cisterns and clanging chain pulls, a marvel that simultaneously captivates and embarrasses anyone too refined to discuss such matters openly. You enter one of these fresh rooms and feel as though you have entered a type of practical magic demonstration. Rotate a tap and water complies. Transparent and dependable, at least generally. Not every mansion section receives these improvements equally. The family bed chambers adopt fresh plumbing first, then guest chambers, then perhaps staff quarters, if finances permit. Gaslight persists in some locations, candles in others. The outcome is a patchwork residence, half modern trial, half old world durability. One corridor may be illuminated by a glowing bulb while the adjacent still smells of tallow and matches. Some callers find this appealing. Others stumble over thresholds in the partial darkness and compose silent complaint letters to nobody in particular. Fresh gadgets march in behind the pipes and wires. Early telephones occupy studies or halls, boxes with cranks and receivers that let voices traverse distance in eerie ways. You observe someone holding a receiver to their ear, speaking into a funnel while attempting not to sound absurd. The line crackles, words blur, and yet the marvel is undeniable. A conversation that once required days of correspondence and postal transit now unfolds in minutes. There are anxieties naturally about privacy and disturbance, about staff overhearing confidences or the line carrying gossip nearly as rapidly as it carries business. Some individuals refuse using the device unless absolutely required, convinced that shouting into a tube cannot possibly be dignified. In another chamber, an early camera waits on a tripod, its bellows folded like a dormant insect. Photography has already transformed how people remember each other, but as equipment advances, it becomes more attainable. Family clusters pose in gardens or on stairs, expressions composed in that earnest, slightly strained appearance that muscles adopt when maintained still too extensively. Plates and films are processed in improvised dark rooms, red light, glowing, chemical aromas rising. A peculiar twist appears in the popularity of novelty photographs. People staged as though they're levitating or double exposure images where one individual appears twice. The mansion transforms into both setting and participant in this fresh obsession with capturing the present. Before it has opportunity to diminish, housework starts flirting with mechanical assistance. Carpet sweepers and early vacuum devices materialize, some powered manually, others by noisy engines stationed outside and connected to hoses snaking in through windows. Using one can demand several people, one to operate the pump, another to wield the hose, a sort of mini exercise disguised as advancement. Advertisements label these inventions electric servants, promising that machines will reduce drudgery. Staff often remain doubtful, noting that someone still must transport the machines, maintain them, and clean up after their mishaps. Progress, from their perspective, appears suspiciously like additional training. The contrast between shiny gadgets and old mentalities stands out dramatically. At tea gatherings and in drawing rooms, a lady may speak enthusiastically about a fresh railway journey or an exhibition of electric wonders, then in the following breath insist that certain social boundaries must never be crossed. Discussions about women working, voting, or pursuing higher education can draw polite bewilderment or outright disapproval. The mansion now contains objects that suggest a world expanding faster, more connected, more adaptable. Yet many of its occupants grip firmly to hierarchies inherited from parents and grandparents. Historians continue arguing whether technology in this period genuinely eroded rigid social structures or mostly wrapped them in modern packaging without altering their foundation. You notice it in small encounters. A young individual enthuses about a fresh scientific lecture they've attended, while an older relative warns them not to neglect their proper responsibilities. A servant familiar with the electric fittings corrects a guest who reaches for the incorrect switch, then retreats quickly, aware that too much knowledge can be socially uncomfortable. A book on evolution rests on a shelf beside volumes preaching traditional roles. A telegraph message announcing urgent information arrives in a household that still prefers invitations on thick paper and decisions made at a very deliberate pace. In the evenings, the mansion glows brighter than it once did, its silhouette visible farther across the fields or the city street. From outside, it might appear like a beacon of modern existence fully embraced. From inside, the picture feels more complicated. Inventions slip into daily customs surprisingly rapidly, their novelty fading. But expectations about class, gender and respectability remain as solid as the stone walls. You move through chambers where fresh currents hum in the wires, hot water flows in the pipes, and voices crackle along telephone lines. Yet polite conversation and rigid manners still determine every choice. The house is learning fresh tricks while gripping tightly to old scripts, a place where the future has already arrived but is still required to clean its feet and wait to be properly announced. Night settles over the mansion with a slow, intentional calm. Outside, the final colour streaks vanish from the sky and the windows transform into dark mirrors. Lamps are dimmed, curtains are drawn, and the large house that has been active all day starts folding itself into shadow layers. You move quietly along a corridor, shoes silent on the carpet, feeling like you're slipping backstage after the performance concludes. Chambers that buzzed with conversation and music now rest in gentle silence. The drawing room is dim, only several embers glowing in the hearth. Chairs that contained gossip and laughter appear oddly motionless, their cushions puffed back into refined shapes. The faint perfume scent and extinguished candles lingers in the atmosphere, along with a trace of tea leaves and cake fragments that didn't quite reach the plate. You can almost visualize the outlines of people still occupying them, frozen mid-sentence, except now it's just you and the ticking clock on the mantel, measuring out seconds that feel considerably larger than they did earlier. Further down, the dining chamber waits in darkness, stripped of its brilliance. Candlesticks stand like pale guards on the extended table, their wicks blackened and finished for the day. The polished surface reflects only the weakest glimmer from the corridor, a phantom of its earlier shine. Silverware has been removed, glassware washed and stored. It's simple to believe that nothing significant ever occurs here. And yet, this chamber has witnessed countless dinners, disputes, proposals, and quiet declarations, all absorbed now into the wood grain. By the late 19th century, chambers like this in many great houses will outlive the families that constructed them, surviving long enough to serve as school dining halls or institutional canteens. When fortunes shift, you climb the main staircase, hand sliding along the smooth rail. The carpet muffles your steps, but the house still registers you, floorboards responding with soft creaks and sighs. Portraits follow you with oil-painted eyes, their faces lit only by a spill of moonlight from a high window. They appear less severe in this partial light, more exhausted, like individuals who have also had a very long century. You stop halfway up and listen. Somewhere deep in the structure, hot pipes cool and contract. A distant door closes with a gentle click. A clock on another floor chimes, its sound softened by plaster and distance, as though the house is conversing with itself in its sleep. On the upper landing, most doors are closed. Behind some of them, family members lie breathing slowly, their elaborate day clothes exchanged for nightgowns and loose shirts. Behind others, staff sleep 2 or 3 to a chamber worn out after work that didn't conclude when the final guest departed the drawing room. The household rhythm has shifted from conversation and motion to breath and dream. But the building itself continues. It contains all of it, every whisper and every snore inside thick walls that have heard more narratives than anyone can enumerate. Historians continue arguing whether ordinary domestic diaries and letters capture this inner existence accurately, or whether they tidy and refine it for the page. But those scattered scraps of writing remain some of the finest clues to what nights like this actually felt like. You push open a door into a quiet nursery. The fire here has burned low, casting soft illumination over shelves of toys and books. A rocking horse waits with its wooden legs braced, as though it will dash forward as soon as someone small returns to the chamber. A doll lies tipped on her side in a cradle, eyes half closed, hair a little wild from the final game. Curtains breathe in and out with the breeze from a slightly open window. You stand motionless and sense how both movement and stillness exist here. All the daytime play noise lingering as an invisible echo around your ankles. There's a reason haunted nursery tales attach so stubbornly to old houses. Childhood never quite remains obediently in the past. Beyond the nursery, a narrow door leads up to the attic. The atmosphere grows cooler as you climb, and the smell changes from polish and soap to dust and dry wood. Trunks occupy spaces under the eaves, their leather straps cracked, lids stiff. Inside them rest old clothes, hats gone out of fashion, letters secured with ribbon, travel souvenirs from journeys nobody has mentioned in years. Sometimes, when 19th century houses are renovated in later ages, workers discover strange treasures tucked into these hidden spaces. One peculiar custom that appears repeatedly is the practice of concealing a single worn shoe in a wall or chimney, a charm meant to repel bad luck. You envision a servant or child once positioning a scuffed boot in the darkness with a small private hope, trusting the house to remember it. Back on the main floors, you pause at a window on a landing. Outside, the grounds lie in a gentle darkness, tree shapes rising against the paler sky. A gravel drive catches a bit of moonlight, suggesting where carriages once rattled and where, much later, motor cars will eventually purr. Somewhere out there, a gate creaks in the wind. The house doesn't know yet that in another century many mansions of its type will be divided into apartments, schools, or hotels, while others fall into ruin or vanish entirely. For now, it stands whole, steady, unaware that it's already transforming into a memory of its own era. You drift along another corridor and discover a small study lit only by a faint glow from embers. In the hearth, papers lie stacked on a desk. Ink bottle stoppered pen resting like a tiny, exhausted animal. A map hangs on the wall, countries outlined in colours representing empires and claims, which future historians will dismantle and debate in a drawer somewhere. In a chamber like this, people sometimes forget things that feel astonishing. Ticket stubs, pressed flowers, household bills, listing prices that seem impossibly small. The building acts as its own archive, not just in official documents, but in accidental debris. Finally, you return to your bedroom. The fire here burns low, shadows swaying gently across the ceiling. Your reflection in the dark window glass appears softer than it did in the bright morning light, less arranged, more like your actual self. You undo buttons, loosen stays or collars, set aside the weight of fabric and ornament piece by piece. Clothes drape over a chair in relaxed heaps, no longer interested in impressing anyone. The bed waits, sheets cool and faintly scented, blankets heavy enough to feel like an embrace. You slip between them and listen as the house sounds settle even further in that final waking stretch. You recognise how much of this place is constructed not just of stone and wood, but of layered time. Every corridor contains the footsteps of people long departed. Every doorknob has turned beneath hands that once worried about things that now feel tiny and distant. Mainstream history tends to highlight big dates, laws, wars, inventions. Yet houses like this quietly preserve the small daily details that make those changes real. You close your eyes and envision all the lives that have crossed this floor, each one thinking their present was solid and permanent, just as you do now. Then their moments folded into the house and became background. Yours will too. The mansion keeps them all in its own deep and creaking memory. The fire sinks lower, and the room edges grow softer, as though someone has blurred the outlines with a gentle touch. The clocks around the house keep ticking, but their sound feels farther away now, like waves on a very distant shore. You can picture the whole building from above, all the chambers, stacked and side by side, each one quiet, each one containing a pocket of sleep. Nobody needs anything from you now. There are no more bells to answer, no more courses to serve, no more clever remarks to find. Everything important for this long imaginary day is already complete. Your breathing discovers a slow, easy rhythm. In, then out. In, then out. With each breath, the mansion details fade a little. The carved banister becomes a soft line in the darkness. The portraits on the walls lose their sharp features and transform into gentle shapes. Even the ticking of that particular mantel clock slides into the background, less a reminder and more a steady lullaby. If a floorboard creaks, it isn't a ghost or a worry. It's just old wood stretching in its sleep, the house relaxing right alongside you. You let the grand front door drift out of focus in your mind. The gravel on the drive, the lamps, the chimneys against the sky, all of it untangles and melts away like mist on a cool morning. Whatever strict manners govern, the chambers don't apply to you anymore. You can slouch, you can yawn, you can let your thoughts wander wherever they desire to go. The weight of corsets, collars, expectations, all of it slips off your shoulders and disappears into the darkness. If your mind attempts to replay moments from the narrative, you can gently let them go, like pages closing one by one. The nursery, the kitchen, the ballroom, each chamber folds itself up and goes quiet. Candles snuffed, doors resting on their hinges. You're no longer walking those corridors. You're just listening to your own calm breath, in and out, in and out. There's nothing to fix. Nothing to remember perfectly, nothing to get right. The mansion is far away now, and you're somewhere much softer, wrapped in your own blankets, safe in your own chamber, outside your window. Whatever night you actually have is perfectly ordinary, and that's enough. Let your eyelids grow heavy. Let your thoughts slow down. Let sleep arrive in its own time, like a slow, kind visitor who knows exactly where to sit and when to stay quiet.